right, hello, and welcome to a very special episode of Letters from Camp. Tonight, I am joined by three brothers. So we have Jim, Dan, and Chris Burgoyne. Evening, gentlemen.
Good
Evening,
evening.
Mike.
Good evening.
So this is kind of a first with some, three guests. We've had two, but now we're reaching a new record. But the Burgoynes have been involved with Camp Winoxid for couple decades now, many, many years, and kind of have a family legacy as well there. So just to start off, we always like to kind of get people's stories. So when you first came to camp, what years you were a camper, what areas you worked in, etc. So if you kind of, each of you want to take us through kind of your camp story, that would be a great kind of way to start.
Right. So my first year as a camper was, my troop was 1 Lancaster. I started in 1990, and I was a camper until 1994. At the time, Gary Shepard was the CIT director, and I hadn't really thought about it, but when I saw how much fun Norman Chabray was having there, Gary was able to get me on to be a CIT, and I don't know how many weeks. I'm fairly certain I was there the rest of the summer as a CIT. And then I was staff so CIT was 94. I was staff from 1995 until 2000. When I graduated college, I had no plans of going back in 2001 until my job disappeared because of the market crash at the time. And then I basically came on and did a variety of jobs. And my last summer there was 2001 as staff.
Yeah, so I'm 2 years younger than Jim and about a year older than Chris. So I started my Camp Winoxid journey in 1992 as a young Boy Scout, having crossed over from Webelos. Was a camper through 1995 and was also a CIT in 95. The very distinguished class of 1995 of CITs, as you well know, Mike.
Absolutely.
The following year, actually, I worked not at Winoxid, but at Camp Split Rock and Camp Collier, where the National Valley Council at the time was running its Cub programs. And then in 1997, went back to Camp Winoxid and worked in various positions until 2003, when graduating from college and starting my career, had to move on and do other things in the summers. From that stretch, I worked the waterfront staff, the Scoutcraft staff, was a Brownsie director 1 year. I was a camp commissioner / assistant program director for a handful of years, and was the COPE director for a year.
Yeah, I was a young kid watching their older brothers go off to camp and come back and tell all these fun stories about all these things that we did. And I go out in canoes and I'm shooting shotguns and all this kind of stuff. And I'm sitting at home saying, well, when do I get to go? So my first year was 93. And I was a camper for a bunch of years. I'm trying to think. I don't remember how many years I was on staff. I remember doing field sports 1 year up at Macaulay Field. That was my first year on staff. I think that was 97 or 98. Worked for a couple of years at the waterfront. Ended up taking a job outside of camp. Couple of years off doing landscaping, some of that kind of stuff back home, but then decided that wasn't as fun. Wanted to go back to camp for a summer, and then at the end of the spring, there was actually I don't know, something happened. The waterfront director who was lined up for Cub Camp fell through, and so I ended up in 2003 being the Cub Camp director, or the Cub Camp waterfront director. That was at Collier that year, and then bouncing back and forth, in the afternoons during once day camp was over, heading back up to Winoxid and spent a lot of the week there. So 2003, that was my last year on staff.
All right. So Jim, we'll start off with you. So being the oldest, did you feel like your brothers were cramping your style? Were you happy that they were also involved in scouting and kind of following you to camp?
No, I'll admit that was an easy one. No.
No. We've always been close, whether it was running Troop 1 Lancaster as, when we were in the senior patrol, or in the Order of the Arrow, or serving at camp, we did our own, we were in different program areas at the time. We load up in the station wagon, go back and forth, but we had a tremendous time. You know, I can't think of any, nothing really wrong. I enjoyed having them up there, and we did it for a lot of summers, so they never really cramped my style at all.
There's not many people who I could probably say what they drove, 25 years ago, but the station wagon I think sticks out.
It definitely did.
All right, so Dan, so you are in Rhode Island, and you've been active with other councils, and on the council level. What are some things maybe that you think are maybe unique to Winoxet?
So I won't claim to be an expert on what all other camps are doing. I've had some experience with a handful of others. I've attended a couple of camp schools, and I learned a long time ago that everyone who is affiliated with a scout camp as an alum, as a camper, as a staff member, they think their camp is the greatest camp in the world. But at Winoxet, we happen to be right about that. So I say that only half jokingly. I do believe, as I think a lot of us do that are involved at Winoxet, that there are some things we do really well at the staff level, and the former staff level, we still take some ownership of that. There's always been a very significant emphasis on customer service and really trying to look at camp from the perspective of not only your campers, who are important, but also the scoutmasters, the leaders, the volunteers, and the parents, and really trying to see camp how they see it and try to improve and meet their needs in big and small ways. I mean, it could be, getting them that roll of toilet paper that they ran out of and that they're in need of, or it could be, bigger program items, or whatever the challenge is. I think Winoxet staff does a great job in meeting that, and that was true 20 years ago when we were working there, and as best I can tell, it still is. And I think a big part of that is also innovation. I think Winoxet's staff is really good at, on an ongoing basis, looking for ways to improve. And again, it's things big and small. It could be some mundane business process that nobody really sees, but it's trying to just do things a little better. Or it could be, a new program item that we're going to start as a new program or improve upon from year to year. So those are two of the things that I think stand out at Winoxet. And I think a big part of why that's able to happen is the continuity of the staff, that people want to come back. I mean, you just kind of heard us talking about, the amount of years we spent there. I think we all were working through, at least through part of our college years. And that's not uncommon at Winoxet. So yeah, that's what I think helps set Winoxet apart.
Absolutely. So Chris, I actually started this, the idea for this month's episode with you because you are the current properties chair. I don't know if that's the right title, but properties chair for Winoxet. And we do have the service day coming up at the end of April. So can you maybe speak a little bit about that role? And then are there any kind of big projects in mind for that service day?
Yeah, so this is actually something kind of new. I stepped into this role last fall, so kind of, about 6 months in or so at this point. And really just, trying to kind of get my feet under me a little bit in terms of all of the different things that are going on. Because, when you talk about a property like that, that's, 200 plus acres, there's, all the campsites, all the Adirondacks, all the program areas, the staff cabins, the dining hall, there's a lot of stuff to cover. But we do, come from a program that certainly values giving back and community service. And as part of the 100th anniversary of Camp Winoxet coming up this summer, one of the events that we have is coming up on April 27th, the end of this month. We're going to have our camp service day. So it's a Saturday. It's a time for folks to, roll up their sleeves, kind of pitch in and give back and help to kind of ready the camp for the upcoming season. So a lot of what we have on tap for that weekend are projects from the normal kind of, spring cleanup things like clearing brush. We've had a few even in the last month or so, a couple of big windstorms and things like that, where there were some, tree limbs and things like that that have to be cleared from trails and campsites and such. In the last handful of years, we've had some grants from the McGee Trust and other places where we've been able to put some capital improvements into place. So a whole lot of new doors, for example, were installed on most of the property, most of the cabins in lower camp, especially, the director's cabin, the program director's cabin, the duplex. So around all of those doors, new trim was installed that needs to be painted. We've got screen doors to put on those buildings that need to be stained and attached and installed. So really just a variety of different projects. Not really looking for people that are, only those sort of handyman skills. It's really, anybody can come up, anybody can pitch in. And I think it's going to be a fun event. It's like I said, it's part of the 100th anniversary. I think we're planning to do, sort of a late afternoon, end time, 3 or 4 o'clock, and probably expect some people to migrate down the street there to the tap room, and lunch will be included. You get a patch for registering, and so all of the times that people think about, the fun times they had at camp. This is a way for people to kind of help pitch in and make that happen for the next round of campers that are coming through this summer, kind of get the property up into shape. So never a shortage of work to do up there, that's for sure.
Yeah. And if people, we do want people to try to register in advance, so you can do that on the council website. There is a dedicated 100th anniversary page for camp, and all the event registration links are right there. So it's pretty easy to get in there. I did it the other day. It's very simple. All right, so let's move on to our lightning round. So we have 5 questions that we ask all of our guests. So to start off, what is your favorite camp song?
Gary Owen.
I like the Hullabaloo song myself.
I always like the Rattling Bog. That was one that as a father of 2 now, have at times tried to teach it to my kids. So
I texted Mark Colwine St. Patrick's Day. I was out somewhere and someone was singing it at a restaurant establishment, and I texted him and said, "They're not as good as you, Mark, doing this song." So, all right, how about your favorite camp skit?
The radio skit always cracked me up with Danny Megan and there was a lot of them that went through it over the years, but Charles Barry Skillen and Jeff D, I think, was in that a bunch of times, and yeah, that was always a riot.
Yeah, I have 2 skits. One was the worm skit. I tried not to do that on a Sunday because I did it in a high-pitched voice, which cracked everyone up, but then all the campers wanted me to do it all week long. So I enjoyed it, but I tried to do it, later on in the week, not on the opening campfire. And then towards the last summer, Jeff D and I did the Mountain Dew skit, which started off with me and him. And by the end of the summer, there was literally like 8 people in the skit. Charles Barry Skillen, and of course, I think George Whitcraft and John D. Lane with their shotgun. So those are 2 of my favorites.
Oh man, so many good choices. I actually would have to say the Mountain Dew skit as well. As well as just any skit that involves a good prop, because that always seemed to be an opportunity for somebody to get hit with something or get doused with something or a pie in the face, which all of that stuff just always made it fun and memorable.
I did get a 2-liter from Jeff in the face with the Mountain Dew, and it stung like crazy. And I did my best not to curse in front of the crowd, and I believe I succeeded.
I have a classic memory, and I don't even remember what the skit was, but it involved Kevin Murray and some Gold Bond powder getting in the face and burning his eyes. And anyway, classic.
Those are some graduate level lessons about, saving for the Friday campfire, the thing that the kids will do. That's a lesson that you don't learn till you're a seasoned veteran. All right, how about your favorite camp meal?
Yeah, I don't know. Nothing's really standing out to me except for some reason like the chicken pucks.
Yeah.
Like the quick chicks? Yeah.
I don't know. That was like a solid like midweek lunch.
It was. So yeah, for a lunch, I agree with that one. And I always, so when we were on staff, and I think they may not do this anymore, but there was always a rotating Friday night meal. It was roast beef one week, and it was the chicken, or excuse me, a turkey dinner the next. Really like that turkey dinner. It always seemed to hit the spot.
Yeah, so we did change that at some point because with selling the pizzas on Friday night, people were like stuffed. So we moved to lighter meal to Friday to sell more pizzas.
It's always the bottom line.
That's right. Um, all right. And how about favorite place in camp?
Believe it or not, for me, probably my favorite program area was the craft shop, just because I was there with Charles Barry Skillen and Jeff Bailey, and it was program wise, the two of them and I just got along great. At the hijinks and the rocket launches, and of course, everyone rushing in last minute to get, I don't know what the award was, but everyone had to get a merit badge. So it was always a Thursday or Friday night fingerprinting class for an hour. We'd have 800 blue cards to do, but that was a lot of fun. I also really enjoyed the Iroquois campsite. That's where we stayed as a camper. And it's literally next to everything. My scout, I don't know who it was. I think it was Bill Mann or John O'Toole, had this great hammock, and I would just love chilling out there and just being, and that was a good spot too.
Good answer with the Iroquois campsite. I will say, and there's a lot of good places at camp, let's be honest, but I love Chapel Point. If you can find a time to go to Chapel Point when it's quiet, nobody around, if it's late at night, early in the morning, or it's just a off-season weekend, it's really cool to just be able to see the lake on all sides. And, so yeah, that's probably mine.
I always really enjoyed the waterfront. I used to like, as a camper, I was often, would do the mile swim. I'd be there for free swim. I'd go out in the boats, work there for a couple of years on staff. Yeah, just really like to kind of cruise around the lake on a sailboat. We didn't have the motorboats back then, but I imagine that's pretty fun too. But yeah, the waterfront was always a good time for me.
And lastly, was there anyone when maybe you were a camper or your younger staff days who you really kind of looked up to or maybe served as like a mentor to you?
At first, for me, it was Gary Shepard. I knew Gary again from my troop. He was the first, he was a director. He was always someone you can go to. When you're a CIT, all you want to do is get hired for staff. So it's like, oh, am I doing this right, doing that? He always had a lot of good feedback. And then later on, when I was a program director, when Jeff D took over as camp director, he was really the one who emphasized Winoxet as an experience, did a great job of communicating what he saw to everybody. He always had his door open. And that, I think, is when, because the program was always excellent, but that's when it really stepped up and became the experience, and it soared on from there. So those two were really influential for me.
I think for me, I'd identify Matt Chimpaglia. So when I joined Scouts in '92, I'm pretty sure that he may not have been the senior patrol leader then, but shortly thereafter was. But he was, about 4 years older than me, and so, at that age, he was kind of he knew the lay of the land. He knew, he was active in the Order of the Arrow, which meant he'd go to another campsite and know people in other campsites, and I always found that kind of cool. So yeah, Matt, I would identify Matt. And actually, just throughout the years, there were a lot of people sort of from that generation who were your staff members at the time when you're a young camper, who now are pretty close friends, which is just a really cool thing about the Camp Winoxet experience.
Yeah, I certainly had a couple older brothers that were good at showing me the ropes, how to find the thing that you were looking for, whether it was, how do I get to the rifle range? Where is that again? That kind of thing. So being the youngest of three was helpful in that regard. But also, it was an interesting time in our troop. We ended up having quite a few people over the years that were on staff, or even people that were, on as CITs for a year, a couple of years, Matt and Gary. Matt was never on staff, but was certainly involved in the program heavily. So yeah, just a lot of those older guys in the troop for sure. Yeah, and it's interesting, even now we we spent the past weekend, a couple of us up north looking at the eclipse and, you know, looking around. It's like a lot of these guys are, you know, people that we learned, people that we met from scouts, people that we spend, you know, ski weekends and go hiking with and all that kind of stuff. A lot of that has just really stuck over the years, those shared relationships and finding people who like to do the same things, you know, like to be outdoors, like to be involved in the scouting program in some way, shape, or form that you know, even now we spend a lot of time with. So it's
I have to
those.
also give a shout out to our dad who took us to camp every single year. Yeah, it was kind of a tradition in our troop that the volunteers who were not the scoutmasters and assistant scoutmasters, who were really carrying the lion's share of the work, you know, from September to June, would kind of step back during the summer camp, and some of the other leaders would fill in. And my dad was part of that crew, and I don't think a year went by where we were going to camp where he didn't spend at least a night or two at camp, along with some other volunteers. And all those guys were hugely important, but particularly dad. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was gonna kind of follow up with that, but like you are definitely not first generation Camp Winoxet. So did you want to maybe touch a little bit on the kind of family legacy from kind of earlier decades?
Yeah, and actually, since you bring it up, I'm going to try to share the screen. All right, so what you are seeing is, can you see it?
Yep.
Yeah.
Is the old Thayer Lodge in what we believe is 1962, which was one of the last years Thayer Lodge existed. Soon thereafter, it was replaced with the dining hall that we all now know, and was burned to the ground. In the center of the screen, and you might notice he bears a particular resemblance to Chris, but maybe to all of us, is my dad, at age 12, what would have been. And moving closer to the foreground, wearing a dark color and having really dark hair, is our Uncle Fred, my dad's brother. So they were there, we believe, as part of the provisional troop. And we believe that, so this is in the table, basically second table from the front. The first table is kind of cut off and you can see the second table. I don't have a pointer. But at the far right of the table, we believe is Eddie Weston, longtime camp ranger and Mr. Winoxet, they called him. And he seemed to be in charge of the Provo troops, at least for this meal. So, Dad was involved in scouts for probably 5 or 6 years. He was a life scout. Our Uncle Fred actually was a camp staff member, worked as the provisional scoutmaster. He eventually became a professional scout for a period of time, and was, I believe, an assistant camp director for some years in the late 70s. Strike that late 60s, early 70s.
Oh yeah, very, very cool. And it is fun to see Thayer Lodge, you know, pictures of the old camp, and Eddie Weston certainly will come up in, you know, in the history posts that have been coming up on the alumni page and council page. So but all right, well, thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining me tonight. I think we covered a lot of ground, and so that was great. And to all of our viewers, you know, tune in each and every month to Letters from Camp. So thank you, Burgoynes, for joining us tonight.
Thank
All
you.
right, thanks, Mike.
Thanks for having us.